This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, and SAE Institute Nashville. You're hearing my voice right now mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes below, and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave us a comment. It's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
So the beauty about normaling, there's a couple terms. The two that you'll see the most are full normal and half normal. A full normal...
I think I'm half normal.
We've got a shirt. So there is a full normal means if I take signal flows from the top to the bottom, but if I take a patch cable and I patch the top row or the bottom row, it breaks the normal, meaning the second I plug into the top or the bottom, signal no longer flows from output to input, and it shows up at the tip of that cable that you've plugged in.
Right.
There is a cool thing that I personally only use in a couple instances. Some people think of it as like a free molt or like a free copy of the signal, but a half normal, it doesn't break on the top row. It only breaks the normal at the bottom row. And then what's cool is you could do like some parallel compression or like parallel processing with that free molt.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. At Isotope, mixing just got even smarter. Introducing the new Isotope Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia, designed to transform your sound with intelligent processing for dynamically precise saturation, reverb, and delay. Plus, Neutron now features 3 new modules and an upgraded AI-powered mix assistant to help you get killer mixes with ease. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off the Catalyst series, Neutron, RX, or any of Isotope's incredible plugins at isotope.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lij Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Ben Sabin. He's got his start at Shangri-La Studio with Rick Rubin, where he saw top artists and engineers work at the highest level. He then split time between Shangri-La and Groove Masters, helping rewire tie lines, patchbays, and converters, sparking a passion for cabling and studio workflow. He also worked alongside legendary studio tech Pat Schneider on servicing and repairs. And in 2018, he helped LA producer Colin Cunningham set up patchbays and streamline his growing outboard gear collection. He then worked on live sound, gaining hands-on troubleshooting experience. And in 2019, he founded Trace Audio, focusing on cappy gear and custom cabling. Relocating to Nashville, where it's now a full-time business serving top industry clients. Ben also rewired my studio, the Toy Box Studio, which is just behind me through this wall and down the yard. And I quickly saw how much we could learn from him. So I had to invite him on the podcast to talk about creating the best setup for your studio. In fact, you're hearing our voices right now through custom Trace Audio cables. These are actually these beautiful white cables right here. So please welcome Ben Sabin to Recording Studio Rockstars. Ben, my man, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm ready to rock, Lij.
Dude, thanks for your patience. It took me a while to, it's actually, despite you making rock solid cables that sound great and work really well, I still have to use computers and TV screens for computer screens and stuff like that. And it took me a minute to get things going. So I appreciate your patience.
Yeah,
man.
of course. I mean, that's a given in the studio world, right? Like, it's not if something's going to go wrong, it's when.
Yeah, exactly. Did you spend time, so you were learning about the cabling and the wiring when you started out at Shangri-La, for example. Were you also doing a lot of maintenance stuff, like deeper maintenance on the studio? And did you get into that world at all?
So I didn't really get into like deep, like heavy repair stuff. However, what would happen is when we'd have like an off day, because the way things would go at Shangri-La is like sometimes we'd be in there for 3 to 4 weeks straight, just like doing a big session, because artists would come and like live at the studio. So we'd get breaks few and far between. So a lot of times it was like, okay, we got 2 days. We're going to have Pat come in or one of the other techs in town. And, you know, they would be like tearing the console apart and getting whatever was not working fixed. And a lot of times they would ask me to kind of come alongside and help, like, you know, oh, we need to make a bunch of jumper wires to like solder this PCB. You know, we're making a jump or like a mod or something. So I would kind of get asked to come in and assist with just more of the, like, I guess you could call it scut work. But, you know, it's one of those things where it doesn't seem like a huge deal, but, you know, yeah, like you got to make sure that you're following the details that are given to you. Like each wire needs to be this long and you strip this much off each side, and, you know, just stuff that it's a small task, but like if you do it wrong, it definitely is a time suck for everybody involved. So
now one thing that I've learned about Shangri-La and Rick Rubin's approach is I think the studio is kind of like all white, right? It's very sort of like, not, I don't know if stark is the right word, but like blank slate, like blank canvas, right?
Yeah, I think Rick tries to create an atmosphere in which it's not colored by like predetermined, like when somebody's entering, he wants it to feel very neutral and like it can kind of adhere to whatever, you know, vibe they're bringing into the studio instead of, which, you know, not to say it's like, I know there's studios where you walk in and you're immediately immersed in whatever that, you know, studio owner has like decided.
Kind of my studio. I mean, definitely parts of my studio. It used to be that way big time.
Yeah.
I was all about the, like, you know, as much personality and character, but it was fascinating to like hear about that other approach to doing a studio. And now, of course, here we are with beautiful white cables in the podcasting studio, which is still begging for a name. So Rockstars, if you're watching this, drop a comment and let us know what we should call this thing. One of these days I'll pick one. Maybe it's just a recording studio, Rockstars HQ for now.
There you go.
But did you guys actually outfit the studio with white cables?
No. So I think most of the actual like recording control room and like live, I know the live room is pretty much left untouched from when Rick bought it. You know, so I think there's a lot of like the original like black cables and stuff, but it's been cool. Like it's full circle. Like there's been a couple times where the manager of Shangri-La's reached out and been like, hey, can you actually build us some cables for, I think we did something for Rick's podcast. I know we built some of the headphone cables for his MyTech private Q system.
Oh, right. Yeah, the private Q. That's supposed to be one of the best headphone systems out there, right?
Yeah. When you can get them.
When you can get them, because they stopped making those, I think.
I don't know what the story is. I think they're like perpetually on back order. So yeah, we've had some fun stories of customers that bought them, didn't get them, so we had to help like, you know, basically reconfigure their studio Q system to outfit something different. But
so what is it? What is the it's MyTech, right?
Yeah, MyTech.
What is that headphone system, in case the Rockstars don't know?
So basically it's a fully analog hearback system. I believe it's the first gen was on a DL connector and they switched over to it's a Centronics connector. But yeah, basically you plug it in, the cable carries power and audio. I think it's 12 channels.
And it's analog, right?
Yeah, fully analog. There's no digital. So, you know, it is for sure like one of the better sounding headphone systems out there. Very simple, you know, just knobs to turn up and have some simple panning functions. But I think for when an artist uses them, they're not super complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think they're also just high quality sound, right?
Yeah.
So when you've got an analog signal, you know, you're not going through any more digital conversions. There's no added latency. And that can be that can make a difference in the studio. I've actually tried, I have an analog setup. It's actually just the Behringer headphone, you know, thing with a more me input. So you can kind of add a little more of yourself if you want. In fact, you've seen it when we were down there working on the studio, but but I've also tried doing some digital stuff, and I immediately noticed that you know, you have to be careful with the digital, make sure you don't add a little bit of latency, because it really came back in the headphones, and I was like, ooh, you know, you have to be inspired by what you're hearing while you're working.
Yeah, Q system. I mean, we've done a ton of studios, and unfortunately, I think Q systems are kind of the that's the thing that everybody sort of puts to the end of their priority
Right,
list. And I usually tell people like, hey, if you're going to spend, I mean, if you're going to be a tracking studio, you should really allocate some funds towards that, because it's one of those things that you don't want your artist to notice it in the way that they put it on and they're like, oh, great, like it just sounds good.
Yeah.
But yeah, nothing's worse than artist sits down at the drum kit or at the keyboards or whatever, and they put their headphones on and they're just like struggling to get a good mix or a good balance, or, you know, just hear themselves like that. That's the last thing you want to fight with, because, you know, that kills inspiration.
What are some of the other headphone systems? When you said it's one of the top ones, are there others that come to mind for you?
Man, there's not, I mean, there's a lot of people making these like cheaper digital boxes, but the one that does stick out is, and we've had the ability to actually work with Paul on these, which has been cool, but Wolf Audio just came out with their new Me More box, which same idea. It's all analog. It has a lot of really cool features. Like there's a talkback mic built in. There's actually, it's like a talkback loop, so you can actually get like a control room talkback into the box, and then you as the artist can talk to the control room.
Right, because that's a crucial part of tracking sessions. You want to be able to
totally
have a conversation easily, and sometimes, you know, if you're playing acoustic guitar, your mic is right there in your face or whatever, or you're on the vocal mic, it's easy to talk back, but with other things like drums or a direct bass.
Totally. Yeah.
How are you going to communicate, right?
What's cool about that system is I believe it's a 12-channel box. You have 8 mono and 2 stereo. You obviously have your talkback, and then you can get a control room feed talkback, but there's a ambient mic on it. So you can, like, if you're playing and you want to feel like you're in the room and not so much just in your head, you can turn up the ambient mic and, you know, feel like you're in the space you're in instead of just in your head.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, that system has a lot of headroom, and it's just a really decent system.
All right, well, give us a little bit more backstory on you know, as an individual too. Like, you were at Shangri-La, which is like kind of like I can't wait to hear about that. I mean, there's like a lot of fascination around Rick Rubin and his studio and everything. But also, like, did you start out as a musician? Or are you a musician first? Like, what got you into this stuff? How'd you end up in a studio in the first place?
Yeah, so I kind of found music at a young age. I found a keyboard in my dad's attic and kind of pulled it down, plugged it in. It worked, like played with the sounds, and just like really got drawn to piano.
It was right next to the box of Jumanji.
Right. Yeah. So really got it interested in like that side of it, like purely just playing by ear. You know, the big artists on the radio that I was listening to was like One Republic, The Fray, Coldplay. So like, and a lot of that's very like piano driven music. So I would like try to learn those songs that I was hearing. And you fast forward, my dad's an electrical engineer. So like that kind of, I guess, sort of infused a little bit of interest in the electronics. Like I had a soldering iron in my hand, probably in middle school.
That crossed that question off the list. When did you start learning how to solder, you know?
Yeah, like friends would have like, oh, I need to replace a battery in like one of my like game cartridges, and I would do that for them because, you know, I had an iron and knew how to do it. So, but yeah, so like I feel like I had kind of both of these interests sort of happening at the same time. And I got a job at a grocery store in my hometown and saved up all summer for a MacBook Pro because I was like, well, I'm really interested in playing music, but the whole process of recording it really fascinated me. So I saved up, bought a MacBook because I knew it would come with GarageBand. And I was like, you know, after doing some research, that seemed like the best like entry level way to figure it out. So I got GarageBand, and it's a great program. I feel like it's very easy to kind of reach the like capacity of like, okay, cool. I feel like I know most of what there is to know about GarageBand. So then I think I continued to save at my my high school job until I could buy, was it Logic 9 at the time? Yeah. So I bought it was back when software came in a box set. So I actually went to the Apple store and bought Logic 9.
Do you remember there was David Earl had a channel called SF Logic Ninja on YouTube.
Oh, yeah. Yep, I for sure watched some of those.
I actually discovered him because I was trying to learn Logic, and I was like watching his videos. And I was like, that's cool, man. I like the idea of having a YouTube channel.
Right? So yeah, I saved up and bought Logic 9, installed it, watched a ton of videos, and I feel like unlike GarageBand, I kind of was like, oh my gosh, there's a lot that I don't know. Like off the top of my head, one of the things that like
we got a guest fly in the studio. This is great. He's a rock star too.
Rockstar Fly.
Yeah.
I realized that like I had no idea what a bus was, and like, you know, just really started digging in and like trying to figure out this software. And I was probably, I want to say like a sophomore in high school at this point, and was figuring out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I ended up deciding that I was going to go to a school called CRAS, the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences. So after graduating, I, you know, packed up, moved to Arizona, kind of dug into the program at CRAS. You know, and I feel like I really threw myself at it because I was like, okay, I'm gonna work a job, but I'm gonna make sure it's music related. So I actually got a job at Guitar Center. So I worked at Guitar Center while I was going to school
in Arizona.
Yeah. And you know, I worked in the pro audio department, and I feel like one of the things that was nice was I got to go to school and work, you know, and learn. But then when I went to work, it was kind of like applied knowledge of like when customers would ask questions about like, how do I record this, or how do I set this up with my system? You know, it was kind of nice to be able to like work with what I had like just learned.
Hold on, Fly, go somewhere else, man. We're doing an interview in here.
Yeah,
Come on, buddy.
See if we can get him to fly.
Go to the other room. There's more places to go. I think we just got the house and studio clean, so maybe it got stirred up. So when you finished school, did you go like straight out to LA?
I stayed in Arizona.
About places you want to go or something?
Well, so I was given an opportunity to intern at Shangri-La.
Yeah.
And I knew I was moving to LA and it was going to be expensive. So while I was working at Guitar Center, I can't remember how it came about. Basically, my manager at Guitar Center approached me and said, hey, we have a client that actually is looking for someone to like do live sound in this like really nice hotel in Scottsdale. So I got approached about kind of taking on an internship role doing that. And that turned into kind of a summer job. I was able to do live sound. This hotel was doing like local artists every single day. So they had a show 365.
Yeah. This Vance Powell start live sound, you know?
Yeah.
Great way to start out and really trial by fire.
Yep. So it was neat because I got to learn on it was an Allen and Heath iLive, I believe. And, you know.
Digital console?
Yeah. Digital console with like the remote stage box, you know, system.
Right.
But really getting to like work in a unique, I mean, it wasn't like, it was one of those venues where it was hard to make it sound good. So it was cool to really learn how to do that with another engineer that kind of was teaching me. So I did that for probably 3 months and kind of just stashed all of my money kind of in the move to LA fund. Right.
And you said stage box. Does that mean it's like an Ethernet cable that runs from the stage to the console or something?
Yeah, it was like a remote, like the preamps are remote, right? Because the console's more of just a surface.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So I guess you get a short cable run right to the mic pre, which is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah. From the stage to the preamps was maybe 20 feet.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by that kind of setup in a recording studio too, or like the idea of a house where maybe it's pre-wired for Ethernet and you're like, oh, let's just put drums in one room and amps in another and, you know, ISO. Yeah. You know, without visual necessarily, unless you have a video going, but
yeah.
You could theoretically just set everybody up with their own little interface.
Yeah, it's cool how many different technologies are available. Like, you know, you can really build a studio around anything.
Yeah. Dreaming of a career in audio or the entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs where you'll learn on professional-grade gear with industry pros, learning through real projects, not just lectures. Explore studio production, live sound, audio for film, and a whole lot more. Or take the entertainment business program to learn about contracts, promotion, and more. With diploma, associate, and bachelor's programs, there's a path for you. Book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. All right, well, so take us to Shangri-La. We want to know about that.
Yeah.
So what was, share a story or your experience about going there, and what was it like working with Rick Rubin? And we got lots of questions to get to. So.
Yeah. So I packed up my little Volkswagen and moved to LA. I found a room to rent with a guy. It was just like a private entrance room in a manufactured mobile home that was maybe 15 minutes from Shangri-La. So it was one of those things where I got out there, I like hit up the manager and was like, "Hey, I'm here." And it took about a month of waiting to like actually get my foot in the door. I think because they were like just getting done with a really big session. So
did you have a lead there or something like that? Or did you just go and knock on the door, just show up, cold call once you were in LA?
No. So Shangri-La, they're a very private studio.
Yeah.
People like, they don't advertise their address, but people have figured it out and like come knocking and, basically are just sent on their way. So
you didn't hear that on this podcast, Roxanne.
But you have to know somebody like and get a good referral. So basically Rachel from Crass, who I know is a good friend of ours.
Yeah.
She, at the time, the assistant manager was actually a Crass grad. So that was kind of the in with anyone that was from Crass. So, I guess I did a well enough job at school for the instructors to find favor in me.
Now, was that Dana Nielsen has always been on the has also been on the podcast. We're talking about engineering there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Was he Crass grad as well?
I actually don't know. I know Dana, he does a ton of engineering at Shangri-La. I don't know if he's actually Crass grad or not.
He was great. So yeah, Rockstars, if you want to check that episode out too, we talked with Dana all about his time there as well.
Yeah. No, Dana's great. It was cool. Dana would always bring like huge setups whenever he was engineering. He'd have like a control surface, and I'm sure it evolved over the years. But yeah, so I got started at Shangri-La. I was just like a production assistant. So my job was really just running, getting food. Everything is like at least a 30 to 40 minute drive away from the studio. Like if you need hard drives or, equipment or whatever, like you got to drive into the valley. So a lot of times I just spend most of my day driving and picking up things. But, like most internships, a lot of that is you're helping the flow of the session, and you're also kind of just learning how to like take details into account. Especially with a studio that's that far away, if you forget the artist's like side of sauce or whatever, like it's not like, oh, I'll just run back and get more. It's like, oh, that's a hour and a half, round trip. So yeah, like I think working there really did instill a lot of like pay attention to the small details, because it's not a quick like, oh, I'll just run back kind of a thing. So that's the beauty of where it is it is kind of an oasis away from everything.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I
think the small detail stuff is crucial, and obviously that taps right into doing studio wiring and all that, because there's so much detail work. My internship was a tech internship at Woodland Studios. And, I really wanted to be in the studio learning how to produce records, but this was the internship that was available, and it was a great studio. So I went and learned from this guy, John McGriff, here in East Nashville. And, he taught me how to solder. He taught me how to, I'd learned it in school, but, the sloppy version. He taught me how to do it right, taught me how to be thoughtful. It's the first time I ever saw a well-loomed patch bay. And once you see that, it's like, it's kind of amazing. There's like this whole artistic practice that's behind the scenes in studios.
Yeah, it that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about starting Trace Audio is I think we can kind of bring the artistry of the wiring, which, at the end of the day, that's not the focus. Is to create a space where someone can make music like that. That's why I built the company I built. I want to help people be able to just focus on being creative. But I found that, a lot of times the wiring and kind of the mess that comes with that, you don't realize like how much cabling does it take to like wire up a console. And if we can do anything to help the workflow be, oh, I have an idea, and you can be recording, your guitar part, or you can get your keyboard part down in like, 10 seconds or 30 seconds. That's way better than the like takes you 30 minutes to like get it all set up and plugged in because you're digging around and So I think that's kind of like, for me, I've found a passion in helping others like figure that side of it out, because it can be a lot, especially when it's, more than a 2-channel interface.
Yeah. Okay. So jumping back for just a sec, just give us a brief description of like Shangri-La and Rick and working with him, or anything you remember learning from your time there.
Yeah. So I mean, like I was saying, I started out as a production assistant, and I got to meet a lot of really great guys while I was working there. We would do a lot of moonlight sessions where there wasn't like the main artist that was working in the studio during the day, so we would take the nights and kind of like bring in artists that we had found. And, I cut my teeth recording a lot at night with some of the other guys at Shangri-La. And, man, I mean, there's a ton of stories. I got to work with some big artists. I think probably the one that comes to mind is I was asked to be an assistant on Neil Young, and just being able to sit in the room and like watch. We cut everything to an 8-track Studer. Pro Tools was the safety backup. John Hanlon was the engineer on that, and it was really cool.
2-inch?
Yeah, track to 2-inch. Jim Keltner was playing drums. I'm trying to remember who was playing bass, but it was pretty insane to like just watch Neil come in, who, he's like, "Hey, I just wrote 6 songs last night. Let's record them," and just sit and like I got to do some patching and help with setup. And there's actually a song about Amazon that my laptop, the voice to text, like I was typing everything out and like recording that in for that song. But yeah, like it was just really neat to be a part of somebody else's, like just kind of watching that like flow of creativity in real time happen. And like, everybody that was in the room had a place.
Yeah. At the beginning stage of our career too, it's really nice to just be in there and just sort of see how things are done. Mm-hmm. Did you find yourself doing that classic, internal thinking, which I remember doing, which is there's a part of me that at that stage that was fascinated to watch it happen, but also was like, I'd probably do it a little different, in internal dialogue,
I mean, I feel like the one thing about working at somewhere like Shangri-La, I don't know if I ever had to like, I would do that differently. Because I mean, I was aware too, like I was trying to be a sponge and just like soak it all in. And, it's cool to work at a level, like a studio at the level of Shangri-La. And I don't think I'd go back and change it. However, I think advice that I would give maybe my younger self would be try to get in at a studio that's maybe more like mid-tier. Because what's going to happen is you're going to end up having more hands-on time. Right. Like at Shangri-La, it was awesome and really cool to be like a part of these huge records in a small way. But I really had to like take my time, which I didn't have a lot of, and like pour that into like side projects in order to get hands-on time. Yeah. Whereas I think like if you work at a more mid-level studio, you're probably going to get thrown in a little bit more often and get to like, get to work and be actually like hands-on, instead of, okay, I'm like working and running and, doing like side projects for the studio, but I don't actually get to like work on music until my time.
Yeah. So that, again, my experience interning at Woodland was like that. I didn't get to be in on the session, so I didn't see the session flow. I saw people coming and going, and you do learn a lot from that. So in a way, I was really grateful that I got to be very hands-on with the tech. I mean, I was able to like pull cards out of a, VR90 or VR60, Neve console, and learn how to recap them and stuff like that. So pretty high dollar stuff. So you moved on from Shangri-La and also worked with Pat Schneider doing servicing and repairs. Yeah.
So basically the manager at Shangri-La at the time, he was approached by Jackson Brown's like personal assistant, who they had kind of just taken over Groove Masters Studios in Santa Monica. And they were like, man, we have a Nuendo rig. We really need to bring it into the 21st century with a Pro Tools rig. We had found out that the tie lines were all pin 3 hot. So if you plugged in a microphone, it would be polarity flipped.
Oh, right, right.
And none of the tie lines were on a patch bay. It was an older 80 series Neve. So basically the tie lines went straight into the preamps on the console. And they wanted to be able to patch the rooms. So ended up helping put a TT bay in for the tie lines to the preamps. We got a whole new Pro Tools rig, so that needed all the cabling for the, the IO and stuff like that. So yeah, I was kind of like splitting time between Shangri-La and Groove Masters at that point. And, it was a lot of learning, and like it was cool because they had hired, Pat came in to service the console. They had hired this wiring lady. I can't remember her name, but she did a lot of the like console looming, and I sort of watched her do what she was doing, and I was like, okay, cool. Like I appreciate like the level of detail going into this. So I did that at Groove Masters until that project was complete. And this random opportunity with a friend of mine, his name's Nick Furlong. He's a songwriter from the same small town as me in Nevada. They were looking for an intern, and I was like, I'd love to go work with like a songwriter or a producer at like a smaller studio. Kind of like I was talking about, like I was kind of hungry for that. Like I just want to like actually work on the music instead of just like kind of observe it happening.
Yeah.
So I was invited to go intern for this guy, Colin Cunningham, who was working closely with Nick at the time.
Right.
And Colin, he literally had like an 8-channel Apogee interface, and I think it was a BAE and a Blue Stripe hairball compressor, right? So very small, like simple setup. But you get a chance to finally like be doing stuff and so like
out the gear and everything.
Colin would teach me like, hey, we're gonna do drum editing. So like I learned how to like kind of slice up all the drums and edit them to the grid, and not like hard grid everything, but just he taught me a little bit of the feel. He taught me a little bit of the tech, and just really kind of got more into hands on with the music. And I got to get credit on a lot of really cool bands working for Colin.
And what was it was a guitar was your first instrument? Is that
piano.
Oh, piano.
Yep.
That's right. The keyboard that was up in the attic.
Yep.
Yeah.
So like, and Colin, I mean, phenomenal drummer, great guitar player. I think keys was like not his strong suit. So a lot of times he'd like ask me to just like, very simple, like kind of chords under like whatever song. So I'd help like fill out some of the track beds a lot.
That's fun.
Which was neat. And,
well, you had mentioned that you were able to help him, set up patchbays and streamline his growing outboard gear collection.
Yeah.
Were your words. So what is that, what kind of stuff goes into that? And then like how might we consider whatever you did there for our studio? Is that relevant to home studio situations and setups?
Yeah. I mean, I know basically the way that Colin built out his gear was he said, okay, I'm going to take whatever plugins I have on my master bus and I'm going to slowly just start buying those in hardware.
Interesting.
And I think the idea behind that was like, when you have labels and artists coming in, not that you're buying gear just to impress other people, but I think part of it is like kind of, you kind of want to put on the dog and pony show, and hardware obviously
and fly,
sounds...
Dog, pony, and fly. Our fly buddy is back apparently.
So yeah, like you really want to have, you want to have really high quality gear that sounds good. So that was kind of the first step for Colin, was like he was buying his master chain, and then alongside that he was also building out like, okay, instead of like preamps straight on the converter, I want to get some nicer like BAE or API or kind of fill out the rack with some preamps that he feels like he can use for what he's working on.
Yeah.
So as he started working with bigger and bigger artists, he got paid out and was able to purchase more gear, and kind of got to a point where he's like, well, instead of digging around behind the rack and like just manually home running every cable every time, like, Ben, can you figure out how I can set this up with a patch bay? So yeah, like I probably did that like, 4 to 5 times with Colin, where it was like big thing of gear, rewire it to like match his workflow, and like most things, it kind of evolved as time goes on. So, I'd say maybe once a year or like maybe every 8 months or something.
Wiring up new stuff.
We'd be wiring up new stuff and like, oh, like, shoot, you kind of outgrew your converters. So like we need to get more conversion, and you outgrew 1/4-inch patch bays because, it's the form factor is now you have 32 in and out instead of, 24 in and out. So it makes more sense to jump to TT. So I think for, people at home, like it's like we offer consultations because I think it's hard to identify when is a good time for me to get a patch bay, or do I even need a patch bay?
Yeah.
Am I good with just like a panel that allows me to plug in easily to my converter? just questions like that.
You've helped me out in my studio a couple of times already, and we got more, plans to do more stuff. And I think the first time was just as simple as moving my existing patch bays from one location to another in the control room to new racks and just getting everything wired up and working. And what was great about it is, you came in and sort of knocked it out. You're very fearless. Like, there's that part where I'm like, oh my gosh, how can anybody else understand this other than me? And you came in and just like, no problem, figured it out. I mean, there's probably a couple of questions for me about what some things are, but how to determine where things are going, what patch points are going to cables that might have already existed. And then another thing that really impressed me was at the end of it, I was like, you know what? I've got a few things that just aren't working. A couple of cable point, like I think it was mic inputs on panels or something like that. And something else was buzzy or not working or did something weird. And you shot that thing out and you fixed it so fast. And I was like, that's awesome. You just pulled out some testing thing. And then more recently you came over and we did a simple, it's like, I guess we'd call it an in-between phase where it's like, I'm all right, I've got new gear. I want to get it at the patch bay, but I'm not ready for the full overhaul. Because that's another thing. Sometimes we think about our studios and we're like, oh my God, I wish it functioned better, but like it's too massive a project for me to even wrap my brain around. It's like, it's going to have to be huge and then you don't do anything. Yeah. And it was cool. You came in and we're like, we can just put this rack up on top here. We'll put some gear there, tie that into the patch bay, and then you printed new labels for it. And it's like, it's so much nicer right now. It's so much nicer working in there, Yeah.
I think that's a big thing we run into with clients too, is either they don't know where to start or like they've got this system that they've spent years building. Right. And it's hard because it's like, well, you're so busy and it's hard to like take downtime to fix it. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll try to come up with solutions where either it's phased out so that we can do phase 1 and you're still working and then do phase 2 and you're still working. Yeah. And sometimes we have clients that end up where they're like, oh, like I'm going to be on tour for a month. So like, here's the perfect window to just come do the overhaul. But yeah, like we kind of work with a whole span of different kinds of people that, like they're in one of those situations where it's like, oh, like I don't have time to we can't rip it all out right now and like start from scratch. So trying to find ways that we can, help give them as little downtime as possible.
Native Instruments supercharges your music production with Complete 15 featuring Contact 8 new machine hardware integration and cutting-edge synth samples and effects. Contact 8 now gives you the chords and phrases tool for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument for blending organic and synth textures. Plus, Machine 3.0 is here, giving you seamless control over Native Instruments gear and the latest NKS-supported hardware. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Yeah, so as far as that big overhaul goes, I would love to do a big overhaul in the studio. And I totally get that idea of, hold on, I gotta close this window here. I just made that worse. Sorry, rock stars. I'm like constantly having to look at multiple screens while we do this and make sure everything's running and then like, press buttons and not disconnect us all in the same time. But I got it. So I wanted to do a big overhaul and it was like, okay, I need a big chunk of time to do it, but also what is that big overhaul? So one of the things that you're going to come in and do is you're going to do this, what do you call it? You call it like a master plan for it or something. Yeah,
basically we do a full like cable package proposal, where we say, hey, these are some of the pain points that you've expressed with your setup. And I know one of the things with yours is feeling like you don't have flexibility to like, if you get a new piece from like a manufacturer that's, sponsoring you or wants to show you like a new piece of hardware, like being able to just quickly interface it and try it without feeling like you're displacing your whole setup.
Because sometimes I get a new piece of gear and it just sits on the rack. I'm like, I can't use it unless I plug it in manually with a cable. And the patch bays TT, tiny telephone, and I've got a little guest bay with some XLRs on it, so I could plug in one, thing to try it out, but it's kind of a pain. So yeah, it'd be cool to have more of a setup where it's like you can just pop a piece of gear into the rack.
Yeah.
So there's lots to talk about related to this. So for example, my studio began as a hardwired patch bay that I did myself. And I'm sure there are people listening that totally understand this. So like if you've been doing this for decades, then you got all these iterations of your studio that pile on top of each other, and it becomes like, bloated software is how it feels, So I've got like the old 3-row patch bays that I had to, hand wire everything directly onto. And then I've got the newer ones that we wired D-subs onto the back of at one point, because I learned like, oh, wow, that's a way that you can connect your patch bays to the cables, run a cable to the rack, and then sort of break it out to your gear. And it's, it's more flexible. You can move the patch bays later on, because otherwise, if you hardwire everything in, like it ain't moving.
Yeah.
Basically, right.
Yeah. And like one of the things that I really like to kind of bring when we're helping somebody in a studio is modularity. Like patch bays can be very complicated, but breaking it into, okay, this rack is wired with this many ins and outs, and this rack is wired with this many ins and outs.
Yeah.
And trying to keep it where it is flexible, and if outboard gear changes, it's updating a label instead of updating all the cabling. So yeah, I know like one of the things that with your studio, we're kind of at that in between phase of, okay, you've got kind of the existing cabling that you've sort of built up, and we've kind of got it to, I'd say it's sort of at its limits of, okay, like there's as much stuff packed into this as we can.
It's definitely at its limits.
Yeah. So I know that's something we've been talking about is, basically getting into instead of hard soldered patch bays with like D-sub tails, maybe getting some, just fresh either D-sub bays or maybe the E3 Elco bays. But yeah, finding a way that keeps it flexible for you as you change out gear. Because, the nature of what you do, you're going to get new gear from manufacturers to check out and talk about. So,
or you just get new gear for your studio.
Totally.
You want to use it.
Yep.
So when you use the D-sub thing, you're like, oh, wow, this is very flexible. But then you realize, except for the fact that each D-sub is 8 patch points, it's 8 lines.
Yep.
And you're like, what do I do if I've got 4 pieces of gear and I don't have the other 4 pieces of gear, and where does that go? And now, like, do you have breakout snakes that need XLRs plugged into those? And it gets kind of messy quickly.
Yeah.
So then, I learned from you that there's other patch bays you can consider too. There's other connectors where you can actually connect one line at a time to the back of the patch bay, and it's still neat and organized, right?
Yep. Yeah. So the most common ones that you can get today is D-sub or E3, and E3 is basically it's a small 3-pin connector that kind of looks like a Firewire 400, but essentially instead of blocks of 8, which works great at like a lot of converters are in D-sub.
Yeah.
Some newer like SSL consoles, and there's a few companies out there that have like blocks of 8 on D-sub. However, anybody that's put together a system with D-sub patch bays kind of knows what I'm talking about is maybe 80% of it is just D-sub to D-sub or D-sub to breakout, but then the other 20% is like really funky, like, oh, I need 3 lines to run way across the room here, and I need the other 5 to run across the room here. And you just kind of end up with these big wads of XLRs, and you just kind of deal with it. Whereas like E3, you have a lot of flexibility. Like you can use 24-channel multi-pair cable, and like have that go to triple D-sub if you're doing 24 converters, or if you have a 32-channel console, you can use 32-channel multi-pair, and it just keeps things really organized and like numerical on the patch bay side, but it also keeps things like really clean on the gear side. Like if you only need 2 channels or 4 channels and you don't need a whole D-sub breakout, we can just build a 4-channel cable to run to that stuff instead of having to do.
And what was that one called? Was that E3 or?
Yeah, E3.
Okay.
Yep.
And then there's other when you get into the sort of high-end, really fancy studio stuff, you start getting into things like Elco connectors and all that. I think when we were wiring up Woodland Studios, we would, oh, look, there's our buddy. I'm calling, this is Bruno, because he just wants to be with somebody as fly as me. You know what I'm saying? So, or Brundlefly. There's a throwback for you, rock stars. Drop a comment in and let me know if you know what that one is. I'm guessing maybe you don't, but I'll tell you later.
It flew over my head.
Yeah, all right. Good call. All right, so yeah, you've got all these different connectors. Something else you mentioned earlier, you quickly mentioned studios were wired pin 3 hot. Maybe do a breakdown for the rock stars, because we may have heard those terms thrown around, but it's like, what does that mean? You know?
Yeah, so something that's kind of an interesting concept to grasp is I'm sure everybody's heard there's balanced and there's unbalanced audio. So balanced audio is basically like out of a microphone, there's 3 pins, there's ground, hot, and cold. So hot is basically the signal carrying, it's the signal from the microphone coming out on one wire. Mm-hmm. And then the negative is basically, it's the polarity flip of that.
It's the inverted signal.
It's the inverted signal. And the reason why that is in there is when it goes into a balanced preamp, there's a little device called an op amp that takes the negative or out of polarity signal, and as sound is, or as the electrons are flowing through the cable, both the positive and the negative are actually getting sound and noise and RF induced equally onto both the positive and the negative.
Yeah, crud from the radio waves floating into the cable.
Yep.
Right?
And as soon as it hits the preamp, if you didn't have balanced audio, you would just hear all of that noise that got induced. But because it takes the out of polarity signal and the in polarity signal, when the operational amplifier basically inverts your negative onto the positive, you actually, this is just kind of basic mathematics, but when you combine 2 sound waves, you get amplification.
Right. So the signal gets boosted because the negative is flipped over and added to the positive.
Yep. And because it's the exact same sound wave, or at this point it's electrons, but because it's the exact same waveform, it doubles in amplitude. Mm-hmm. And the noise, when it gets polarity flipped, the noise is actually out of phase with itself. So all of the noise cancels out, so you don't hear it. So balanced audio is, it's kind of a huge thing for audio.
Yeah, it's a really clever thing. I wonder when they came up with that. I don't know when that was invented and what it was like before that, but
yeah, that's a good question
to find out. It's got to be like early phonograph, early tape or something like that. Or maybe it was before that. Maybe it has to do with telephone lines and things like that.
I mean, I think a lot of it, like transformer balanced, like when transformers started being introduced, I think that's when balanced audio became a thing.
Yeah, you mentioned op amp, so that would be an IC chip circuit, an active op amp, or is a transformer considered an op amp circuit too?
Well, so IC chips were a huge thing in fitting way more op amps into like a small area, but I mean, you look at API, a 20 op amp, right?
Fair, yeah.
Like those things are, compared to an IC chip, are massive, but so op amps have been around for a minute, I'm sure.
Operational amplifier.
Yeah. So
that's cool. So the 3 connectors that are running down a cable, like a mic cable, are the hot signal, the plus, the minus, which is the inverted signal, and then the ground.
Yeah, ground or shield. So basically, the shield basically is what's catching all of the like unwanted sound, and then negative gets polarity flipped and you cancel out all your unwanted noise and you get actually like a doubling of the desired signal coming through the cable.
Yeah. That was a cool thing about doing the tech internship, is really learning like what's going on inside these cables.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do these things do? Because, the number of times I've had like maybe an intern come into the studio and they grab a short guitar cable and plug it into the pedals and we don't have any signal. And it's like, dude, you can't use a TRS cable for that, and they don't know anything about that.
Mm.
So learning what's inside the cabling is so useful, and then what kind of connectors they are. And one of the quizzes I used to tell my interns is like, what is they'd say, what is a TRS?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then they'd have to tell me, and I'm like, what's it used for?
Yeah.
And then they'd always forget. It was a loaded question because they'd always forget headphones.
Oh, yeah.
They'd always forget that same connector doesn't just mean a balanced cable. It just means 3 connectors.
Yes.
You know, and it could be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that comes up often where people are like, oh, I need a balanced cable. And that doesn't always, like, TRS is not always balanced. It's more about what kind of signal are you sending through the cable versus like the cable itself. Because you can use a TRS to TRS cable as like you could technically plug in a guitar, which is an unbalanced output, and it will flow through it.
Yeah, I guess it depends. As long as what's connected to that ring and ground is the same on both ends.
Yep.
Because otherwise what it does is it might short a signal to ground, and then it'll mess things up, or you don't get the ground, or I don't know.
Yeah, or like look at a headphone cable, right? So tip is left, ring is right. And then sleeve is ground.
Yeah.
And in that case, left is a completely different signal than right, you know, with the panning and stereo imaging. So that's technically unbalanced because it's not the positive negative, it's actually left and right, versus like a TRS to TRS coming out of, you know, a piece of balance gear. That is actually balanced. So some of those things can get confusing when you're like trying to figure out like, okay, do I need is it a stereo cable or is it a balanced cable?
Right.
And again, it really just comes down to like what 2 pieces of gear are being plugged into each other more so than like the actual cable.
Yeah. And on the headphone cable, your left headphone and your right headphone both use the same ground. They share that same ground connection.
Yep.
All right, so let me jump over to some more questions. I guess we kind of answered this, but you know, the question was, what's the best way to plan my studio wiring?
Mm-hmm.
And then the, second part of that question is, what's the biggest mistake studios make with wiring?
Mm-hmm. So I think the best way to start planning is, like, usually what I do with clients is we make a list of all the gear that they currently have. And we try to figure out if there's any, because everybody always has plans of like, oh, like when I get this record, I'm going to buy X, right? So a lot of times we try to consider, future growth as well when we're planning out, because nothing's worse than designing your system into like, okay, it's at capacity, and the second I want to add something, it's, the whole system we just built is no longer viable.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great if you can work with people where when they are ready to do the next thing, they call you back.
Yeah.
And the answer isn't as like, oh, sorry, yeah, you're screwed because of that first move you did. You want it to be something where people can keep coming back to you. And I love that in general, like whether it's the electrician, the plumber, the carpenter, the cleaning people, the tech, the organ tuner, the piano tuner. I like, to me, my world is so much easier when I can just find one person to work with and just have that number in my phone, and that's who I call when I need to do the next thing.
Totally.
It's such a better way to work,
Yeah, and that's, I think the reason we've done so well is that people enjoy that, sometimes the job requires us just to come in and kind of do the bare minimum, and we'll do that. But a lot of times, I don't approach it necessarily from like I'm trying to be the sales guy. It's more like, hey, if this was my space and I was trying to use it the way that I understand you're trying to use it, here's some things that I would do in order to save myself some pain later. Because I've been in a lot of situations where I can sort of see over the hill and like, oh, I can see this problem. Let's do this small, like, pay now and save the pain that you're going to experience later, in order to avoid like, oh shoot, I wired my studio for 24 IO. But I was planning on getting a 32 channel console, like things like that, where, you try to save cost in the long run for people.
Yeah. Okay. So then, was that the answer to the biggest mistake, is like wiring it the wrong way? Or is that more like you just help everybody avoid?
I think the biggest mistake that I do see is people will kind of, we're all kind of hacks at spreadsheets, right? I feel like that's just something you find yourself using whether you're a studio owner or, So somebody with a studio, like you've probably opened up spreadsheets at some point.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'll get people that send me spreadsheets, and they design, and they a lot of times they just think of things, like if they're doing D sub in banks of 8. So I think it's really easy to just sort of have like a half-baked idea and just executing on it. And then you can run into a lot of problems. And, I've found that a lot of people are super grateful when we come alongside and help them kind of think through all those, like, yes, but if you do it this way, this is going to be a pain point.
Yeah.
And even if they still decide to go that way, I think they enjoy that they at least kind of have that knowledge going into it instead of feeling blindsided by like, oh shoot, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'd say the biggest mistake is just not leaving enough room for growth. Like, cool, I'm going to buy an 8-channel converter, and like they max out their patch bay, and kind of like just not leaving that room for growth of, oh, well, the second I buy that preamp, I don't have room for it.
Right.
So a lot of times, like, I'd be like, cool, if you need one patch bay and it's maxed out, if the budget's there, like, why don't we get a second patch bay, and we'll not cable all of it, but cable some of it, so that way when you do buy that compressor, that piece of gear that you've been eyeing, you can just get home and plug it in and just go, instead of, oh shoot, and then you wait like a week and a half to get all the stuff in and plug it in. Like, it is nice to like just get the piece of gear and be creative with it, instead of like, oh shoot, I gotta do all the things.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times I've had a piece of gear and it just sits there.
Yeah,
just sits on a shelf for ages before it finally gets. I might plug it in once for something, and then I'm just waiting and waiting for it to get on the patch bay.
Yeah,
so it's awesome. And having a patch bay is such a great way to do a studio. We don't always have to use the patch bay for everything. Have you found that some situations it's advisable for people to like selectively have a straight run from a microphone to a pre right in for vocals or something like that? Some like high fidelity critical recording thing. It's good to have that simple version plus the patch bay version. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's always kind of the discussion of, well, what sounds better? Like, at the end of the day, going direct to a console, like as direct as possible, is going to give you the purest sound. However, a patch bay allows kind of that creative workflow where anything to anything is an option.
Yeah.
And I think that's the trade-off you just have to make as somebody that's owning a studio or like having a small project studio, is what's more important to me? Is it the flexibility to create on the fly and like use anything to anything, or is like kind of that, high fidelity, like every electron, like I need as few connections as possible. Like, is that kind of more important to you? And I obviously there's a balance between the two, but I think for most people it's like, well, yeah, I'd rather not spend hours like rehooking everything up just for the sake of removing one XLR cable, or one solder point.
Almost got Brundle flying.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I've had, there's a client that we had in LA that he was kind of a solo producer and would bring artists in and work on like singles. And I think he knew like, okay, this is my vocal chain and this is my bass chain. And like, he was pretty like set on that. So for somebody like that, I think kind of doing the more direct thing makes sense. Cause he's like, no, I like that CO1B only does this job. Like I'm never going to use it for anything else other than that. Then sure, like we don't need to do patch bays or, anything with that.
Right.
But for the studio that's like, well, I do have guest engineers coming in and they're going to want to hook up their, they're going to bring in their little 8-channel preamp situation or whatever it is. And they just need the flexibility and not feel like their entire studio got ripped apart just to accommodate some new gear or whatever, right?
So that's what you want a guest bay for.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Like having a guest bay or some kind of like loom that you can hook up, guest gear. But yeah, I mean, patch bays, I think the trade-off is it saves a lot of time and it just really opens up a lot of doors for, you can try new things like for sonic experimentation, but also just being able to use the gear in a timely fashion.
Yeah, totally. iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music. Check out the new iZotope Catalyst series featuring Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Powerful tools designed to supercharge your mixes with intelligent processing. These innovative plugins give you dynamic control over saturation, reverb, and delay, effortlessly enhancing excitement and clarity. And now Neutron introduces new modules like Clipper, Density, and Phase, completing your flexible, fully equipped mixing suite. Plus, the new AI-powered Mix Assistant helps you create a custom signal chain for your audio, referencing professional instrument profiles or your own examples, with easy macro controls to dial in a perfect mix. Use the coupon code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, Neutron, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session, the second half of the show. My guest today is Ben Sabin, joining me here at RSR HQ, Podzilla. I don't know what we're calling it right now. Are you ready to rock? Ready to Rock Studios. There you go.
There you go.
Are you ready to rock? And are you ready to jam, dude?
Yeah, let's go.
Sweet. All right. So I think a question that everybody is probably wondering is, it sounds cool to be able to work with you and outfit a studio, but I don't live in Nashville. So how am I going to do that? So what's your answer to that?
Yeah. I mean, we've worked with clients. We've flown to LA to work with people directly. We have a few out of state projects. Like, we can travel. We can do like a Zoom call consultation. So yeah, I mean, it's, even though we're based in Nashville, can travel. And then even if it's a thing where the budget's not there for us to travel, I've actually done a few patch-based setups where we've wired everything in the shop and we've shipped like all the patch-bays pre-wired with labels on everything. And we've had customers that they're blown away. They're like, man, I expected like at least a mistake, and I wired everything in and like it just works.
That's cool.
So yeah, no, there's a lot of options if people want to work with us.
So you're able to, through things like Zoom and FaceTime videos and things like that, you can actually get a sense of a space and what lengths are and be able to give feedback on here's what you could do.
Yeah.
To route wiring and things like that, and actually just know what cabling to build so that it can be shipped.
Yeah, I mean, I will say when it's remote, a lot of times we do kind of have to put some of the responsibility on the person we're working with to like, hey, how long is this?
Communicate well.
Yeah, get measurements and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, there's a couple customers of ours that can attest to like, yeah, like Ben's never met me in person. Their team did a great job, like kind of understanding what I needed, and as long as they provided the measurements, like, and I always tell people to err on the side of like, give yourself like 10% extra. Like if you think it's 10 feet, like maybe go 12 feet or
right.
Like just build in some pad. Not so much that you have a huge mess of cable to hide, but enough to where I want to move this over a foot. Like you're not hosed.
We actually just did that for these white cables. I told you about it and just gave you a rough estimate on length. Mm-hmm. And then you built them and just walked in with them just before this interview, and we plugged them in, and they work. Not only are they working, which is great, but they were the right length.
Yeah, and you've got room to
and they're white, and you call them the Stormtrooper.
Yeah, they got the Stormtrooper look. Yeah, so I mean, if anybody wants to work with us, like, feel free to hit us up, because we do local, we can travel, and if it's something that's just easier remote and budget allows for that, like, yeah, we can build a whole console package and ship it, and have a nice spreadsheet for you to kind of walk through, like, oh, this is cable 1 and connector, channel 1 goes here and channel 2 goes here. And
so let me think of an example of a breakout. So somebody might want to do a TT patch base. So there's a couple of, you can do TT, which is the small, tiny telephone, and you can fit, 96 points?
Yeah, generally it's 96 points.
The top, so it's, what is that, 24, row of 24?
48 over the top, 48 over the bottom.
Yeah. And then the alternate is the 1/4-inch style patch bay.
Yes.
Now, which you've probably seen a lot of home studios and stuff like that too.
Yeah, I think the reason why a lot of home studios use 1/4-inch is one, cost. I think like Black Lion recently put out their line of 1/4-inch patch bays, and I think the most expensive one is somewhere in the like $200 to $300 range.
Right.
Which, you know, for somebody just starting out is a little bit more palatable than, oh, it's going to be like $500 or $600 for the cheapest TT bay. You know, and if you get something a little more quality, it's kind of in like the almost $1,000 and up range.
Now, those 1/4-inch designs, the cheap ones that I remember first seeing in the, you know, early on was be like, you can plug a 1/4-inch cable in the front, and then on the back side is actually another 1/4-inch jack.
Yeah.
So you just literally run a guitar cable to something and then back over, or whatever cable.
Yeah, like a balanced TRS usually, but
yeah. And then I've used that term just meaning like in a very like,
yeah,
what do we do with this home studio kind of style way? You know, it was easy to figure out. But then moving on to a pro setup, the TT ones are great. You can fit a lot of connections.
Mm-hmm.
It's very high quality. And then on the back, you could actually, like I said, you could physically loom hardwire solder onto the connectors and then run cable direct to things. Or more practically, you can have like a D-sub connector on the back, which means now you just run a long D-sub to D-sub cable to get all the way over to the rack or wherever the gear is.
Yeah.
And then you connect another D-sub on that, and it does sort of like a breakout cable. And if you're doing something for somebody, you might be able to say, all right, we'll set you up with a TT patch bay, and then use, you know, what's the length run? Okay, great. You're going to need a D-sub that's 25 feet, 30 feet, or whatever it is. And then on the breakout cable, do you get really granular about trying to loom that breakout up the back of the rack and over to each piece of gear remotely? Or is it more like, hey, let's just have, you know, like a fan out kind of thing, and we're going to just put all these different connectors on it for each piece of gear?
Yeah. I think for like outboard gear, I generally try to keep it very universal. So like, let's do a 2-foot fan out. So the XLRs have, you know, 2 feet, which translates to roughly 4 feet of spread.
Right.
So that you can plug in any piece of gear and it'll reach everything. You know, it may not look like perfectly dressed, but it's a little more fluid for if gear is changing in and out. You know, we do have people that are like, hey, I have the budget. I want to pay you to fly out and like make everything look perfect.
Right.
And we've done that, and that it's a really cool look. However, it's not super flexible. Like if you change out a piece of gear, that dress to that piece may not fit the next piece. So it just depends on like what the, you know, what kind of aesthetic is the person trying to hit.
Right.
But I think for most people, the outboard gear, we kind of do a generic fan out, and you can there's still ways to like kind of do it tidy and neat, and not look just like a giant mess.
But if somebody's investing in like a, you know, more of a high-end console or something like that, that's something you can help with too.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we've remote wired a couple desks. Vintage King is a company that we work with a lot. And I mean, we did a console for a guy in Iceland where it was a Neve VR, I believe. And we built all the looms at the shop, and, you know, we have a great way to like label every single cable and every channel. So it shows up and it's very like easy to figure out like what cable's what. So, you know, that's something I'll mention too. Like a lot of people don't realize, like, yes, we do like the big consoles and like, you know, huge studio wiring jobs, but if you literally need 2 XLR cables, like we can build them and are happy to do that. So and
it's nice to have, and they're great quality too. And, you know, it's nice to have a cable that, you know, is enough high enough quality that you are like, all right, I'm not shortchanging. Like I just bought this cool mic. I just got this cool outboard gear, and I got this great converter, and I got my Pro Tools set up or whatever I'm recording in. But you don't want to be like, but maybe that XLR cable I bought on Amazon is actually kind of junky, and it's like ruining my sound. Well, from one piece of gear to another, you know.
The saying goes that your chain's only as strong as the weakest link, right?
Right.
And, you know, a cable, at the end of the day, like cable's invisible, but when it's not invisible, like it's having issues like the workmanship or the solder joints or whatever, if it starts to fail, like you're going to be chasing your tail. You have a client sitting there who is like, I'm ready to take a vocal take. And you're like, hang on, like my, I got to change out this mic cable. That's the last position you want to be in. So like the reason why I got into making cables was like, I want it to be done well and just extreme high attention to detail. And yeah, like I strive to not have our cables be the thing that's like, oh, like this isn't working properly, So
now on another level, sometimes, with our studios, we're off somewhere and we've had to wire it up ourselves. So we've done it and we've got it there. But a real struggle with moving things around, moving gear around, everything is like the labeling. And I found myself with just a mess of a patch bay label. It's like little pieces of tape and things that aren't being used are taped over. And then, there's tape going over what used to be the label on there. And then it's scribbled in Sharpie and it's really hard to read. And you guys do a great job of printing out actual patch bay labels, so that it looks great. So tell us a little bit about that, and can that be done remotely as well, and how does that get done?
Yeah, so there's two types of labels. The one that right now we're working on, hopefully getting into TT soon, but 1/4 inch, as you have up here on the screen.
Oh, here, let me do a screen share so you can keep talking about it, but I'll pull it up so rockstars can see that.
It's basically a vinyl adhesive label that you can go on our website. We have pretty much all of the like current manufactured 1/4 inch patch bays available with a label. You can basically pick your model, you can group, you can color, you can type in your text. And basically, we will print on demand and ship you a fully customized label.
So this one we're looking at. This is on your Instagram, right? And this is an example of a TT bay.
1/4 inch. Yeah.
I mean, excuse me, a 1/4 inch bay.
Those are 1/4 inch bays. This is actually a picture from Sam Pura. The previous one was Sam Pura.
Oh, sorry, I'm jumping around.
This is Lester Estelle, the one that you were just on.
Okay, cool.
And
so what's cool to see here too is these are different styles, different brands of patch bays, right?
Yeah, so I think those are Neutrik. Those ones are Samson that you're looking at.
But this is encouraging because I think Rockstars, what you need to know is that like it doesn't matter if you think you've got the weird patch bay. Ben can actually make one that looks gorgeous and fits your patch bay perfectly.
Yeah, like right now I think we offer Art, Behringer, Black Lion, Samson, Neutrik. Pretty much if you can buy it right now on Sweetwater, we have a label for it. Some of the more esoteric, weird ones we don't do, and it's primarily because A, we'd have to physically get one to like make a template, and two, like if they're not being manufactured, it's kind of hard to justify the setup cost of getting that sorted out. But yeah.
Well, I had I can't remember if I bought any patch bays from you, but I think I had older patch bays and you were able to label them and they look great.
Yeah. And so TT, these are like we were talking about, these are just for 1/4 inch.
So this is now we're looking at their, the Trace Audio website, Rockstar. So this is the custom patch bay label creator, right? So you come here, maybe give us a little bit of a
so you can click design now.
Right.
It gives you a list of the different brands. So let's just pretend we're going to make a Black Lion one. So you can.
Okay, so hold on, I'm half blind here. So there we go.
Okay, so you can click Black Lion, and we've got their XLR bay, their TRS or TRS3 bay, and then there's actually a TRS Bluetooth bay.
Okay,
so
cool.
let's just pretend we were going to do the TRS.
Is that the
TRS3? Yeah, the middle one.
Great. So click that. Oh wow.
So basically, the first step is you can color your cells. So you click on whichever patch point.
Let's just pick one here.
And then in the upper right, left-hand corner,
what color do you want today?
Let's do blue.
Let's do blue. Let's go with this. Not too dark. Right about there. Let's go with that. So then you hit select.
Yep. So that will recolor your cell.
Cool.
And if you click multiple cells, you can actually merge, which is kind of a neat
like
feature.
Shift click on them or something.
You just click two cells that are next to each other. So that'll highlight the merge function up at the top there.
Okay, and then I do merge. Okay, great.
And then you can pick a color.
That blue again.
Sure.
And then if we liked that blue we had, and we were like, I don't remember which one it was, then there it is on the bottom.
Yep,
so
there's a color palette for recent use.
And there's a little black line there too.
Yep. So that
sort of separates between whatever your logic is, right? You're like, that's one piece of gear. This is a different piece of gear.
Totally. And then you can go to the next step either by clicking next step.
Do we need to name anything?
Well, that's the next part is we're going to get to the, so next step, that brings you to where you can edit the text.
Oh, cool. So then you could be like on here, just double click it and then put like inputs.
Yep, exactly. You can do inputs, outputs. You can do name of gear, channel number. Like
this is fly. This is our buddy the fly. And then this is, oh, I see. So how does this work? So we've merged them.
So because they're merged, it makes like a header text. So if like, let's say that was a 3-channel device, you could call it, preamp outputs.
Okay, so then I'll put preamp output.
Yeah,
and we're putting our outputs on the top.
Yeah, I mean I think that's the normal flow that most people have.
Is it? I'm all backwards.
Outputs to inputs.
Inputs on top, and outputs on the bottom. But I think that's because I'm not normaling things together. So we'll talk about that in just a minute too. All right, so I hit return there. Now, why is this one? Oh, I see. So that was the selector. Dark purple just means that one's selected.
Yeah, it'll just highlight which cell. And then, you click the word edit and you can type in your text. And then
so you can be like number 1 here.
Number 1, number 2.
And can I tab?
No, that's something my web.
Yeah, I can. It just look at that.
My web team's working on that. But
thank goodness for web teams. 3.
Yeah, unfortunately,
you tab out of it, but not into it.
Yeah, the quick key thing, because this website is hard coded, it's a little bit more of an involved thing. Yeah, I think you just have to click it, Lij.
Okay. Are you ready to launch your career in the audio or entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, right here in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs to prepare you for the industry. From studio production and live sound to audio for film and a whole lot more. You'll learn by doing, working with professional-grade gear alongside experienced industry pros. If you're more into the business side of entertainment, SAE's Entertainment Business Program teaches essential basics like contracts and promotion to help you navigate the industry. With diploma, associate, or bachelor's degrees, there's a path for everyone. Plus, Career Services supports graduates as they take the next step. Want to see it for yourself? Immerse yourself in Nashville's exciting music scene and book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848.
Yep.
Return. Cool. All right. So then we want to go print this guy or something, right?
Yeah. So you go to the next step, and that actually gives you, we offer a private label option. So you can actually replace our TA logo with, if you have like a studio logo or a brand.
Is that right here?
Yep. So you click that. You can find a file on your desktop, upload it.
All right. I don't have one ready. But you could put up your own logo.
Yeah. Like you could have the recording studio Rockstars logo and like throw it in there if you wanted. And then you go to preview, which basically this is the final step that you sort of
next step, right?
Yeah. It gives you an overview of the whole label.
And then there's a preview. I see it. So you can see your whole thing. And then if you're like, oh, I missed something, you just click back.
Yeah, exactly. You go to the step that you want to tweak.
Sometimes this stuff, I could see how somebody might be like, oh man, I don't have enough time to finish this right now. So do you lose your work if you start it and you don't complete it right then and there? Or are you able to save it or something?
Yeah, so in the upper right-hand corner, there's a thing that says Save to My Designs. You can click that.
Oh, right there. Okay, cool. Yeah.
And then it'll prompt you to create a login, username, and password, and you can actually save multiple labels by creating an account.
Oh, cool. So Rock says you could go there and just play around with it now and just see what it might look like and just save it and come back later if you want.
Yeah, kind of an unintended consequence of this is if you're trying to design your layout or like need help visualizing it, you don't even necessarily have to buy a label. You can really just use this tool as a way to lay out your patch bay and kind of get some ideas and save that. And then, it's only $25 right here. And wait, is that actually, it's maybe even, I think you have a better deal than that for us, don't you? Yeah. If the listeners use coupon code, it's RSR15.
RSR15. Yeah.
You'll actually get 15% off.
So am I doing the right cart? Am I doing, that's awesome, dude. Thank you for doing that. Rockstars, RSR15, get 15% off a custom printed patch bay label shipped right to your studio. we'll talk about how to put this on here in just a minute when you get it. But so then you just come here, say I agree to something, and then add to cart or whatever?
Yeah, this step is just, it's you acknowledging that you proofread and we're not liable if you misspelled
Oh, right,
Neve.
yeah, if you mess up what's printed.
Yeah.
Right, you got to actually put the right stuff in there.
Yep.
So another good reason to do it, save it, come back later, do it a couple of times.
Yeah.
And then get the actual thing. So then it comes here, and then you go to where would we? And then we put in a coupon code somewhere.
Yeah,
right?
you would just go to the checkout page, and then there's a spot on checkout that'll have
let's just do it right there.
Coupon code, discount code right there up in the,
right there.
Yep.
Okay, great.
and you do RSR15.
RSR15. And I don't know if prices are liable to change a little bit for shipping or anything like that. But
Yeah, we do charge for shipping.
did it not work? All right. Well, it will work when you go do it, Rockstars. I promise.
We'll make sure that's.
It probably just today. I had other hiccups today. So that's cool. All right. Well, then you can get one of these made and shipped to you, which is super cool. And I highly recommend it because it looked killer in my studio. So then let me see. What else did we want to ask about? There was...
Well, I'll make this note. If somebody is interested in having TT labels printed, we don't have a slick web designer for that yet. However, you can email us. Just hit up orders@traceaudio.com. Let us know what kind of patch bay you have, and we can work with you to, get some paper strips made for your actual TT bays.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Awesome. And then when you put them in mine have the little plastic clear covers, and you just put them right behind those and snapped them on, and they look great.
Yeah.
So I don't know how exactly you did it because I just came back and it was all done and it looked beautiful.
Yeah, we use it's a large format printer with like a really nice thick cardstock. And we print in full color, and we use a paper slicer to just make it really easy. I mean, for those who have probably spent hours trying to get the scale to print properly, and then you go to FedEx and you cut it out and you realize it's the wrong, it was the wrong printer settings. I think we help take a lot of that frustration.
Yeah, and then by the time you think you finally got it right, you're out of printer ink again.
Yeah, and
then it doesn't look so good anyway.
Yep.
And yours look just awesome down there, which was great. And then Rockstars, if you're within reaching distance of Trace Audio, I mean, I was able to just loan you a set of the studio keys so you could let yourself in when I was busy doing something else, and just came back and the whole setup was done and it looked awesome, and I started making records. Yeah. And I patched in the gear and it all worked right off the bat, which was cool. So like you said before. All right, well, let me keep jumping in with some other questions. Let's see. So let's talk about this. So one of the questions is, how do I create an efficient signal flow? And then a second part of that question is, what should we know about the future of wiring and studio and Ethernet, for example? Is that even fair to throw that into that question?
Yeah. So I think, to start with the question about planning workflow, I think really just identifying pain points is a big one. And by pain point, I mean, what is something that you do? Like what is a part of your creative day that you just dread? You're like, oh man, I want to go make music, but I find myself doing X like every single time. It takes me 30 minutes to get into it. Or I find myself unplugging and plugging in this every time. Yeah. So like when we're working with somebody, we try and identify those pain points and figure out like, okay, how can we eliminate that? Like what panel or patch bay or cable can we like introduce into this setup to remove that barrier? So for example, if somebody has like a huge collection of keyboards, but they only have one stereo DI, a really easy fix for that is, okay, let's get like a couple rack mounted DIs so that every keyboard has a dedicated DI channel, and then, wire up those DIs to go to a patch bay. So now instead of, oh, I want to play this piano or this keyboard synth, you're not having to unplug and like plug into your DI and then run your DI directly into preamps. It just shows up at the patch bay, and, you can do some TT patches and boom, you're recording, or give them dedicated inputs and all your keyboards you can play at once. Again, it just comes down to the workflow preferences of the person studio. But yeah, like I think that's really the big thing about getting workflow fixed is finding your workflow pain points and what gear and cabling can we throw at it to like, okay, cool. Now I don't have to spend every session setting up that or, plugging and unplugging that.
Speaking of throwing things at it, now instead of a studio fly, we have a dog outside barking while you chat. So I don't know. Let us know if you hear the barking dog, rock stars. Always good to know. My mixing powers are strong, so you might not hear it. All right. So with my studio, for example, I've got the patch bay. I used to do things where I'd want to set up for every session and I'd set up differently. And then I kind of evolved to the place where it's like, I'm going to make more music if I've got a house drum kit ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I've set up that way. I love having, with enough mic preamps and mics and instruments, it's great to have instruments plugged in and ready to record, just by simply like firing up tracks in Pro Tools and saying like, piano, there it is, But part of that means pre-patching and things. So then now I have a patch bay where I've selected which mic pre's do I want, what's the routing, all that kind of stuff. Some things stay very much the same. Some things move around a little bit. I find that once you sort of begin to know your studio, you sort of know where some of your favorite signal chains are. And then once you got it set up, it's like occasionally you want to change it out for something, but a lot of times you just want it to be, that's the signal chain you're going to choose for the kick drum, the snare drum, the vocals, the guitar preamps and stuff like that. And so then, now I've got a patch bay and there's just like a forest of cables hanging off the patch bay because everything's pre-patched, which is okay. I can do that at times. And that we've certainly seen a lot of studios where that happens. But at the same time, it opens up potential issues with like, you don't want to accidentally unplug something and not know where it was plugged in, or you don't bump any of those patch cables, because when you patch something else in, you might like jostle one, and now you just now you got a half patch on something, or you've got a noise or a crackle going on an instrument. So you were pointing out the benefits again of I guess where I'm headed with this is to talk about normaling in patch bays. And coming up in studios, I thought of normaling as something that typically happened with a console signal flow. But I think you pointed out that it's totally doable with our home studio setups where we've got racks of gear and stuff. So talk a little bit about that. What is normaling? What do we need to know about those things? How does that work? And what are some of the benefits that we might run into if we start thinking like that?
Yeah. So I'll start by defining what a normal is. In the simplest terms, a normal is basically it's setting up the patch bay with a flow of signal in a way that you would normally use it. I think for a lot of people, it kind of clicks like, oh, a normal is just like, how would I normally use this with no patch cable inserted? So the idea is there's a top row and a bottom row on a patch bay. And when you have a normal, it's when the top patch point is automatically connected to the bottom patch point. So for example, in your studio, you have tie lines where you plug the mics in the wall, and then you have preamps. So a normal way to set up your tie lines to your preamps is your top row of your patch bay would be tie line outputs.
That's why when we were doing the labeling, you're like outputs on top, inputs on bottom.
And then your mic pre inputs would be on the bottom row. And if you have the top row normaling into the bottom row, the output of your mic tie lines would normal into the preamp inputs. So the idea there is you plug a microphone into tie line 1 and it shows up on preamp 1 without you having to go do a tiny, a TT patch cable from top row 1 to bottom row 1.
And I mean, preamp 1. So would you actually encourage, so let's say the preamps are like all over the control room in outboard gear and in 500 racks and whatever else we got. Do you sort of encourage people to put a little label 1 on that preamp as well,
Yeah, I think
if it's over to the left and label 4 might be over to the right or something.
Yeah.
It just depends on what you got, I guess. Right?
Totally. Yeah. It depends on, if your room is your room, like I know there's a lot of people out there that are like, I'm the only one working in here. So like figure out what system works for you. But yeah, it is helpful to know like, oh, okay, I have like a huge collection of I have 2 of this, 2 of that kind of preamp setup. It can be helpful to know like, oh, that's patch bay. I like to go patch bay is a letter. So like patch bay A, patch points, or I do rows. So like one patch bay would be AB, and the next patch bay would be CD. So like, let's say your preamps are on row B, you'd say, oh, like the API 312.4 is on B1 through 4, and then the Neve, I have a 2-channel Neve, and that's on B5 and 6. So you can literally
the
put a label.
patch bays are the letters. A is patch bay A, patch bay B.
Well, it'd be the rows, right? So
rows,
your first patch bay would be like AB, because row 1 is A, row 2 is B.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you can kind of label your gear in that way too. So you know, like, okay, I want to patch in this compressor. I've put a label on the compressor that says like, I don't know, H11 and 12. You kind of know when you go to the patch bay where you're looking at to patch it. So it's kind of a little trick to help you out to already know where the gear is on the bay. But yeah, so with the normaling thing, it's just a way to remove patch cables from your setup, which seems counterintuitive. Like, why did I buy a patch bay if I don't want to patch with cables? But to your point, it just helps alleviate that huge spaghetti mess. Like, you're going to make a little bit of a spaghetti mess with patch cables, but you want to, if it's something where you're like, okay, I'm going to plug 12 mics into the wall, and I know that those are all going to hit the first 12 preamps, that's 12 cables you're saving if you normal that versus if you have to patch every single one of them.
It's a huge savings. First of all, patch cables are expensive.
Yeah.
They're not cheap necessarily, especially if you want to get the good ones.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, it's less wiring.
Yep.
It's less cables. So if we want to go back to that thinking of like shorter cable run is higher quality audio, you're actually making it more reliable potentially. I don't know if there are issues, if some patch bays are built better than others as far as like reliability of the normal inside it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the company that I prefer, if budget is there, is Bitree. And the big standout for Bitree is they don't use switches. A lot of companies use dip switches to change normaling.
Right.
Bitree actually uses something called a shunt jumper, and it's literally it's a small piece of plastic with a metal, like a bent piece of metal, and it jumpers. Like you put there's a very specific pattern depending on if you want a full normal or a half normal, or a throughput or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's no switch to get dirty with a Bitree.
Right.
So you don't get like built up dirt and stuff inside that mechanism the same way you would with a switch. Because a switch, I mean, I'm sure people have heard before on their gear, when you push a polarity button on a mic pre, you hear crackle, and it's because dirt gets in there. Whereas with like a Bitree patch bay, it's all shunt jumpers, so there's no
that
dirt.
Sound and that dirty switch thing is literally, it's just two pieces of metal, of physical contact, kind of brushing against each other with a little crud on there. That's all it is, right?
Yep.
So sometimes, Rockstars, if you do run into a dirty switch, I couldn't believe this. Like, first time I sent out something to a tech, and I was like, how'd you fix it? And he was like, we probably pressed the switch, a few hundred times.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times just
I didn't know that.
Physical motion. I mean, you can use a little bit of cleaning or contact spray, but sometimes it's just, they call it exercising the switch.
Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring Contact 8 and expanded hardware integration. Whether you're crafting cinematic scores, EDM bangers, or experimental soundscapes, Complete 15 gives you industry-leading synths, sampled instruments, and creative effects to bring your ideas to life. Contact 8 introduces powerful new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth textures in real time. And with Machine 3 now available, you'll enjoy even tighter integration with Machine Plus and the latest NKS-supported hardware from brands like Akai, Korg, and Novation. Plus, Complete 15 features revamped Massive X, Guitar Rig 7 Pro, and Isotope 11, helping you shape, mix, and master with ease. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Let's clarify that cleaning and contact spray. Make sure they're not spraying like, 409 inside their gear.
Yeah, no. I mean, like, I would, if you're not sure cleaner on what you're doing, like, leave that to the tech. But yeah, basically there is a specially formulated, and again, it depends on the type of switch, so don't just go grab whatever because your buddy told you about it and sprayed in the switch.
What about deoxit? That's a very common one.
Yeah, there's deoxit, there's deoxid. MG Chemicals makes a bunch of different ones. Again, it really, I think it's easy. Oh my, I saw this tech do this with some faders at a studio I worked at, so I'm just going to use deoxit and spray it in there. Not always the best thing. I will say this, deoxit does leave a small film, and sometimes that's not preferable. So again, I think it really comes down to what is the best chemical for the use case.
Right.
So like, yeah, like just be aware of like, okay, if I'm going to use deoxit, like maybe check with, your trusted tech first. If that's like the preferred way to clean,
right?
With
because
whatever
you've
that is.
got you've got the thing that's getting cleaned. So it might be a metal contact. It might be a brass. Well, I don't know what the different ones. Is it brass? Is that
There's like a carbon strip that like for like a variable potentiometer.
Right.
There's like actually
totally
like a carbon.
Surface.
Yeah. It's like physically crushed up carbon basically on a strip. And as you turn the pot, the like resistance changes, and that's where you can get dirt and stuff on there. But yeah, you just want to make sure that whatever chemical you're using is like actually supposed to be used with that type of switch, because sometimes chemicals can melt the plastic like inside the switch, and you're going to do more damage than good. So.
Right. Yeah. And another thing I was surprised to learn from my MCI tech was a pencil eraser. You can also just erase, like on the end of an edge card where those contacts are, you can just take an eraser and clean it that way, and it actually gets the dirt off it.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, I've been in this space and worked with a lot of techs, and some guys that, they'll be like, no, this is the only way to do it. And then somebody on the opposite spectrum that like both are highly regarded and respected techs, and it's like what they're saying almost conflicts with each other. So it is funny how the space is kind of filled with some of that, where, it's like music. Like some people swear by this guitar and you can only, or like this pedal and everything else is garbage. And, somebody else will say the exact opposite. It's just, it is funny because, there is a lot of like, okay, this is an absolute truth about audio and like cabling and connectors. But I think there is a lot of things that come down to preference, and sometimes that gets skewed as, my preference is the only way to do things.
Right. Okay. So back to normaling.
Yes.
The normal connection. So there's essentially a more solid connection theoretically than using a patch cable, more reliable. Maybe a well-patched patch cable is going to be as good, but now you're running through the little short cables. Sometimes we get these cheap patch cables, and if like I've got some that are so cheap, I use them for some things. For some things, I still use them, like plug the computer audio output over to such and such a speaker.
Yeah, or like a talkback mic or something.
Yeah,
right?
or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you've ever cut into one, you're like, holy crap! There's only 4 tiny pieces of copper in this thing. That was it, versus the quality stuff, which has got some real copper in it. So using the normal can avoid some of that additional fail points in your cymbal. I've had tracking sessions where it's like there's crackles in the drum take. What the hell? And you go over and you wiggle the cable and the patch point, and that's what it was. It was like,
yep,
or a buzz, a ground that doesn't seat properly.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
Well, and I think a lot of that does come down to like, when you have like super old patch bays, or like you mentioned, like cheaper cables. Obviously, like a brand new system or like a well-maintained system with,
it's only brand new when it's brand new, dude.
Well, yeah. Obviously, the idea is to use it.
Once you get it,
but
it's becoming vintage fast.
But yeah, making sure that like, okay, if my patch bays are facing up, like throw a towel over it at the end of the day so that dust isn't settling into the jacks and like causing issues.
If it's on the kind of almost vertical surface.
Yeah,
or horizontal surface.
Yep.
On your desk or something like that.
Yep.
Okay, so you get that benefit from the normaling. And then I think another thing is sometimes you, like I'll find that my stuff's all patched in, I'm out of inputs in Pro Tools, but I need to do this thing. Then you're like, oh, let me go steal some of these lines from the drums. Now you pulled patches and you're like, I don't want to have to fish these back again later to figure out which one's which. How do I deal with that? So with a normal situation, you should be able to have like a drum set normaled to your inputs. But then if you're like, you know what, I'm going to use that line for something else, or I'm going to use that mic pre for something else, you can just patch into it and it would break the connection that was going to the drum.
Yeah.
And now you're using it for something different, a different instrument or something like that. And then when you need to go back to the drums, all you do is just pull that cable out. So that could be really handy too.
So the beauty about normaling, there's a couple terms. The two that you'll see the most are full normal and half normal. A full normal.
I think I'm half normal.
We've got a shirt. So there is a full normal means if I take signal flows from the top to the bottom, but if I take a patch cable and I patch the top row or the bottom row, it breaks the normal, meaning the second I plug into the top or the bottom, signal no longer flows from, output to input, and it shows up at the tip of that cable that you've plugged in.
Right.
There is a cool thing that I personally only use in a couple instances. Some people think of it as like a free molt or like a free copy of the signal. But a half normal, it doesn't break on the top row. It only breaks the signal, the normal at the bottom row. So again, like let's say you had output of preamps half normaled into the input of your converters. If you patch a cable out of mic pre-out 1 and you moved that over somewhere else, you would still have signal flowing from preamp 1 into your converter, and you'd have that like copy of the signal coming out of your preamp out.
Yeah, like it's like a Y cable.
Yeah, you can think of it as like a Y. And then what's cool is you could do like some parallel compression or like parallel processing with that free molt.
Yeah.
And then you can bring it back into a different input on Pro Tools, because if you bring it back in on input 1, that will interrupt because it's a half normal, so it breaks at the input. So
you could do something like have a bunch of outboard mic pre's on your drums that are normaled to the input of your interface, so that you're recording individual tracks of all those high quality, mic preamps, mics on the drums. But the half normal could be also like going over to the inputs of an additional mixer.
Yeah.
And then you could do, a little submix of kick and snare and toms or whatever you wanted to do
totally
like real-time parallel compression on drums while you're tracking and recording.
Or like, let's say overheads, you can leave, the overheads can normal, like, so preamp into your converters, you could patch out of the preamps for the overheads into a compressor and just smash it, and then bring that back on like an available pair of converter inputs. And that way you've got your clean overheads, but you've also got this like smashed overhead,
right,
that you've made, and you can just track that in and blend to taste.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, of course, the issue we can run into that is you can have impedance problems when you multi-signal and you're going into the interface and then into some compressor, right? Or do you find that generally, if you've got a good clean cable connection, you just won't hear any differences there?
You can have impedance issues. Well, like with splitting, you can have level drop when it's like a mic level. I in a studio setting, I don't generally recommend passive mic splitting. If you absolutely have to do it, like once is generally okay. But
let's clarify that. So you mean when you say don't recommend passive mic splitting, you mean the microphone cable XLR coming to the mic line on our patch bay before it gets to a pre.
Correct.
If you try and split it at that point, you don't want to split it.
Yeah, because
a Y connection. You want to do more like a buffered split or something.
You can do they call it a transformer isolated split.
Yeah.
Which is still going to color your sound, but at least that way, like let's say you have one microphone and you want to hit two different preamps. If you passively split that, it's going to sound way different tracking that one mic going into two preamps than it's going to sound if you take that same mic into the one preamp, record it, and then, again into the other preamp and then record it.
And the way that I would always check for whenever I would split something to make sure that it's not screwing up the sound somewhere is I would listen to just the original sound that I was recording. So like, let's say it's splitting and going into an interface, I'd solo that track in Pro Tools, and then I'd do the split, and all you have to do is just like patch in and out of the other thing that you're multing to, and just listen to. So it's like if you're recording signal A, but you're multing it to go do something with signal B over here, listen to signal A and mess with signal B in and out of
Yeah.
that piece of gear and just listen to see if signal A is affected or drops in level. And,
Yeah.
if it does, then you might be like, okay, screw it. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to ruin the clean sound to try and add this other thing.
Well, and again, like I think like we talked about earlier, I think it's all based on compromises, right? Like everything we do, even if it's more of a musical choice than like a recording choice, there's a compromise to be made, right? Like you did a more simple part because you felt like that made more sense for the song, even though you could have like added like more of a, a little more shreddy or whatever. I think the same thing comes with like recording is, okay, does it take away from the song or the idea I'm trying to capture if, okay, yeah, technically the mic sounds better if it's not split, but like to get the effect I'm going for, in that moment, it's fine. Like it's going to be fine. But yeah, I think approaching whenever you're doing a recording, like trying to capture it at the highest quality you possibly can, but also without compromising the like creative integrity of
right.
what
And that's
you're
kind of
doing.
going back to that idea of like having a patch bay as opposed to a single wire where things are, one mic goes straight into one pre and straight into your Pro Tools or whatever.
Totally.
You don't have any flexibility when you do that. So there are situations where that's the right answer. And then there are a lot of situations where the flexibility is the right answer, especially in studios. I mean, it's like
100%.
Yeah, I mean, like how many times have you ever been like, I want to do an overdub, and then you're like, it's going to be, I don't know, I can't figure out how to plug it in, so screw it.
Yeah, well, like as an artist, you'd probably be annoyed if you said, "Hey, I have a great idea for a vocal take," and your engineer says, "Okay, hang on, I'm gonna direct solder everything to this new preamp or whatever." Like you're gonna lose the idea, Yeah, no, that's not the answer. The answer is cool. Plug into that plate, that runs to another plate, that runs to this cable, that runs to the patch bay. That, like, yes, it's going through a lot of stuff, but it allows that person to get the idea out as fast as humanly possible. Because we're just like, what's cool is I feel like something that I bring to the table with what we do is I understand the engineer's position that they're in. I get the artist position that they're in. And like, it's kind of this thing where everybody's just trying to like bottle, like it's trying to capture that like lightning in a bottle, right? Magic in a bottle. And trying to create a setup that allows that to happen, right? So yeah, I think that's kind of the key is figuring out how to make a patch bay and workflow work in a studio so that you can just get the idea when it's raw and like tangible and not 30 minutes later.
Yeah, I mean, I think Richard Dodd was quoted as saying, what's the best mic to use for a recording? And the answer is the one that's ready to go now.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Okay. So let's see what. Oh, now that understanding this kind of normaling in the patch bay, I don't have the normals in there, but I'd love to have the normals.
Mm-hmm.
And now it becomes this question of like, it sounds like it's a bigger reconfiguration of everything in the studio.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, you come in and you do the, the studio design makeover kind of thing. Where you're like, let me help you with that. We'll show you what it could be. And it was great, and I'm really excited to finish out my studio and get it going where I've got everything wired in properly and I've got the normals in place and stuff like that. Yeah,
no, I think it's fun to hear back from customers after, because I'd say a lot of times it's not the next day, it's like the next month or the next 2 months, and they reach back out and they're like, man, I've spent nights just sitting in there and like figuring it out, and it's like they're just really happy with how easy it is, and like it's like, oh wow, like it's really opened up my ability to be creative with the gear that I have.
Yeah.
And I spend a lot less time like figuring out how to hook it all up.
Yeah.
So
yeah, groovy. How can the rock stars find you and find out more about like doing a consultation on their studio and, just have a conversation to like figure out if and what they should consider for their space?
Yeah. You can always email us. There's a contact form on our website. You go to www.traceaudio.com. And up at the top, there's a contact page. You can fill that out. You can email me at ben@traceaudio.com. And we're also pretty active on Instagram. Our Instagram handle is Trace Audio Official. We have the little TA logo.
A couple here. Yeah, I'll go to there. I'll take us back. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's great. Well, let me see here. Let me see if there's anything I didn't bring up yet that I want to make sure we covered. We covered a lot of good stuff here, for sure. Do you have any tips for the rock stars who are like, I need to also be able to, fix cables and fix gear and, be able to be solder savvy in my studio too? I guess one of the questions I had were, as far as like, I understand that I want to work with you to redesign my studio and get it going, but I also understand I also need to have like the studio sort of solder repair kit and be ready for some basic fixes and repairs, because a mic cable will go out,
totally,
stuff like that. Some will start acting funny, and half the time or more, I could get in there and probably fix it and get it back into use. So what do you tell people when they ask you about what kind of basic tools they need for their own studio maintenance?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously getting a good soldering iron, there's a million different types of solder. So like understanding what kind of solder you want to use. There's leaded, there's unleaded. I know a lot of studio cats kind of prefer the leaded stuff because it melts easier, and it's not as great for your health. So make sure you're using an exhaust
Lead's
fan
not
or something.
So good for you.
Yeah. But
and a lot of times you're hovering over what you're working on, and the smoke is just coming up past your face, right?
Yeah, you can. There's actually,
and it smells good.
Yeah. Amazon for like, I don't know, $60-$70, you can get a great little like air filter fan that absorbs most of the smoke, so you're keeping that out of your lungs. But yeah, no, I mean, one of the things I'll point people to is we actually have a blog on our website where we go over some of the tools of the trade, anything from like soldering irons to small screwdriver sets, and some of the more like nitty gritty of like what kind of tools is Trace Audio using. So I kind of outline a lot of that kind of stuff in there.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of great resources, even on YouTube. Like just look up how to solder. I will say like most things, there's kind of the very basic, like, you turn it on, it heats up, it melts the solder, you melt the solder on the wire, and away you go. But
any tips on pre-tinning? So stuff I remember learning was like, you need a little sponge that's like not sopping wet, but it's got a little water on it. You kind of wipe off the old solder off the soldering iron on the sponge, and then you pre-tin it a little bit.
Yeah. You want to make sure your iron is like, it's shiny, but it doesn't have a big old glob of solder on it.
Right.
One thing I was always taught is you want to heat the work, not the solder. So you want to make sure that you like if you're soldering an XLR, for example, you want to heat up the solder cup on the XLR and then feed solder into the cup to like, it'll have a better bond, and you have less chance of making what they call a cold solder joint.
Right.
Which a cold solder joint is just when there's like a crack or a fracture in the solder because it melted or it hardened too quickly, and it didn't set right.
Yeah. And then but sometimes, if you try and take a soldering iron and put it on a dry cup on the XLR
Yeah.
connector, it's like it's not making enough of a connection to transfer the heat. So then sometimes, like I remember I would take a little bit of solder and just put a little tiny dab in that. It's
Yep.
enough to just transfer the heat from the iron to the connector.
Totally. And
then
you'll
it
find
heats
that,
up
especially
quickly.
with like already, 20-year-old solder joints, a lot of times you do have to feed fresh solder on it to get it all to melt.
Yeah.
But yeah, like one of the techniques we use is if we're building an XLR cable, we actually pre-fill the cups with solder. We still heat the work and then lay the wire in the solder so that it's making contact with the actual connector contact, but two, like it's going into that solder, and then you're heating the work, not just like putting the iron straight on the solder.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one tip I can do.
It's nice to know that you guys are there paying attention to like what exactly is the best solder connection and how does that get done? Whereas in the studio sometimes we're like I'm just trying to get this thing to work, or I'm trying not to burn my fingers anymore.
Yeah, well, and obviously there's like we called it combat audio when I was working in live sound. Like sometimes there's a moment for combat audio, and it's like, yeah, if you've got one mic cable and it's acting up, and that you have your singer that needs to like get a vocal take in, like just get it working, and then you can go back and make it pretty and like super solid after the artist has left. But yeah,
there's also other stuff that goes into cable building that we never think about, which is strain relief. What's strain relief, and why should we care about that, and why are we glad that you guys are caring about that stuff?
Yeah, so the strain relief is the idea that when you yank on a cable, because it's going to happen, like whether it's inadvertently because you tripped over it, or because you're just tearing down from a session. You're just
how do you think the interns pull a cable out of the patch bay?
Yeah, they're just grabbing the jacket, like the actual cable, and just yanking
on it.
Which the whole reason a strain relief exists is when you pull on a cable. If there was no strain relief, you'd literally be pulling directly onto, like, the solder joints would have strain on them. And that copper is like when you pull it, that copper would be feeling you pull on it.
Yeah.
So like in an XLR connector, like we prefer Neutrik. Neutrik has this great little, it's called the chuck. It's like a plastic piece that as the boot gets screwed into the connector, this plastic piece actually pinches and grabs the cable jacket. So that way when you pull on the jacket, like if you pull on the jacket, I recommend you should always pull from the connector because that creates no strain.
Right. So always grab the hard end, the connector cover to pull things in and out, never just yank on the cable itself.
Yeah. But if you do end up pulling on the actual cable, all of that strain gets transferred, basically it stops at that strain relief or that chuck in like an XLR boot instead of like directly being strained on the solder joints.
Right.
Yeah.
But then even inserting the cable just right so that it's within the strain relief and it gets grabbed in the right location, and then the cables have just the right length to get to the connectors and everything's happy. It takes a real, understanding and high craftsmanship.
Yeah.
Which is the stuff that you guys focus on,
Yeah. Well, and like one of the things that a lot of people, when we've had shop tours, they realize is like we have a lot of, high-end wire processing machines that, the reason why we have them is it creates a really high level of consistency. So, we like to strip a lot of our cables at 1 inch off the end for like when we're doing XLR connectors. And it depends on which, if it's Neutrik, if it's an X series or an XX series, without getting way too deep into that.
Right.
1 inch is like the perfect strip length for the strain relief to still grab that like outer rubber jacket. But yeah, like we've opened up customers' cables that they've, we're like at their studio and they're like, hey, I've got this pile of cables. And we've opened them up and like the strain relief isn't actually grabbing anything because they stripped it way too far back, and the like, the plastic part that's supposed to grab the jacket is just like, either it's like grabbing the actual conductors and causing more harm than strain relief, or it's kind of just floating and not actually performing its job. So yeah, like there's those little details where like, when somebody opens up one of our cables, I kind of want the initial reaction to just be like, wow, that looks really clean and like really solid.
Yeah.
Because like the last thing you want to be worried about in a recording session is like that thought in the back of your mind of like, it's kind of a cheap cable. Like
Yeah.
you know, is it going to fail today? Like, I just want it to be like, when you grab a cable that we've built, it's like, this is going to work every time, you know, unless you do something dumb, like run over it with a car, you know, like do something to damage the cable, but the actual like workmanship that we put into it, like, you know, we want to instill the highest level of confidence in the person buying it.
And have you ever opened up a brand name cable that is, you know, purchased off Amazon and gone like,
yeah,
oh my God, look what they did? Or noticed that the pin 3 and the pin 2 sometimes get reversed in those, and people wire them up wrong?
Yeah, I mean,
like, I don't know, they're sent out to sweatshops somewhere.
I've definitely had customers that have gotten, not from us, but like they'll have, you know, yeah, like you said, some name brand company, literally it'll be wired out of polarity.
Yeah.
You know, which is
I've
very.
had those too. We were at Bonnaroo, you know,
Yep.
hook up a cable and it's just, there's no signal. It's like, what the hell's going on, you know?
Yeah, or it's out of polarity. Like, you know, the kick drum is supposed to be, you're supposed to be having air come out, but it's being pulled in because it's polarity flipped.
Right, right.
Yeah, so I think a lot of cables look good enough on the outside, but like, I think what really matters is like how it's constructed on the inside.
Yeah, big time.
And not cutting corners. And yeah, like again, having the benefit of some of this like really high-end machinery that allows us to cut things precisely and strip things precisely without nicking any of the conductors, and just making a product that, you know, is I would argue can kind of hang with the best of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you guys all know what you're doing too, so you're able to, you know, proof the work that you're doing and make sure that it's done right. Okay, so for last question, for the rock stars with their studios, and they're like, okay, well, what if it is out of polarity? What if there's a broken line somewhere? Do you have any go-to troubleshooting? Are there any tools that we might want to consider for our studio for cable checking?
Yeah.
Or making sure that, you know, quick check that stuff's actually functioning properly?
Yeah. So I would say the hands down, like, the best tool that we have at our shop is the Rat Sound Rat Sniffer. I think they're about $60. You can buy on Amazon. It's from Dave Rat. It's literally it's 2 pieces. One's an XLR male, one's an XLR female. It's battery powered. You can plug it into an XLR. The nice thing is most cable testers, you have to have both ends of the cable at the tester.
Right.
The Rat Sniffer is cool because you can test a pre-installed cable that's 100 feet long in the wall that there's no way you'd get both ends to the, you know, to the same point.
Right.
You can plug in one side, take the other end and run down to wherever it is, plug it in, and you can actually look, it displays what's wrong. I think it's 3 green lights if it's correct. And then it has like a whole matrix of like, if it's, you know, this combination of lights or not lights, it tells you what's wrong, which at the end of the day, you just need to know if it's right or wrong, and then you can fix it. But it is nice to have like, oh, pin 2 and 3 are swapped. Like, it kind of will tell you what's wrong, and you can more quickly, you know, get it fixed.
That's cool. So like, for example, if you've got a mic line that's going across the studio and you want to know why is it not passing signal?
Yep.
You just connect this thing on one end, come back into the control room, connect on the other end, and I guess you could still access your patch bay. You just use maybe like a
TT to XLR.
TT cable or something.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right, now this question you sort of answered earlier, but let's ask this one in the context of soldering maybe, which is you go back and find young Ben, and say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of soldering in the studio yourself one day. What advice do you feel like going back and giving yourself?
Do you mean like specifically about like the technical of soldering, or
cabling and that kind of stuff? Yeah.
I think, man, that's a really
or wiring a studio.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be the first to admit, like, I don't think I'm the end all be all expert, right? Like, I think having a posture of always wanting to learn and improve, like I guess I would go back and, you know, kind of just remind myself to always keep that posture of, you know, because I feel like truly most people that are experts in their field, you didn't start as an expert, right? Like, you learned through trial and error, and really just listening. Like, I found that a lot of times, you know, there are times where I get asked for my opinion and like, what do you think is best? But a lot of times my job is just listening, like hearing, okay, this is how this person works, how they'd like to work, and just figuring out like how we can help them improve what they're already doing. But yeah, I mean, I hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think it's great.
Yeah.
Just always keeping the, you know, the learning, the beginner's mind.
Yeah. And you know, I mean, there are some things that I know that I disagree with. Like there's older texts that have like one of the big topics is when there's two ways you can make a connection. You can crimp or you can solder.
Right.
And I know a lot of older techs will be like, oh, you got to crimp and then you got to solder that crimp.
Right.
And I definitely am not in that mindset. A crimp, I mean, there's NASA articles talking about how crimp is like basically the best connection type. You know, solder joints are going to fail when they're, you know, introduced to high vibration, like, you know, especially in like aerospace or like,
or like music cranked up. And
like vibrating
in the room.
Which, you know, most XLR cables are soldered and, you know, I'm not saying necessarily that those should be crimped, but when it comes to like multi-pin, like Elco or D-sub, you know, we have people ask like, oh, can you solder those after you crimp? And it's like, well, what's going to happen is the solder is going to wick into the wire. So it's going to actually like flow and travel up into the wire. It's going to go past the strain relief point of the crimp. And when you yank on it, where that solder is, that's actually now a brittle point.
Fascinating.
So, you know,
because solder puts a lot of heat into cables, and heat is not really good for cables in metal. The more heat, you know, the appropriate amount. I mean, I remember taking metalsmithing class, and it was like what would you do? You would heat it up, and then it would become flexible, like easier to bend.
Yep.
And then you would hammer it, and it would get rigid again.
Yeah.
At least with like coppers and whatever else we were using.
Yeah, well, and like if you think about it, most like Mogami, for example, a lot of that it's somewhere between 23 and 24 gauge, which is really, really thin wire.
Yeah.
You know, and you do need to have solder. Like if you're doing an XLR connection, you do have to do solder. However, you know, like we talked about earlier, there's actually like a physical strain relief that's making sure that those solder joints don't get tugged on. But when it's like a crimp pin, there isn't a strain relief. Like it's just the pin.
Right.
So when you add solder to that pin, it creates a brittle point. And I think it's a very old school practice that I've seen a lot of techs do. But my mindset is you just need to have the right crimp tool for the job, and it should, you know, there should be no issues with like the pull test, making sure that wire doesn't like pop off from the crimp.
That's awesome.
So
that's awesome. Yeah, my old MCI console used to have telephone punch blocks on the back.
Yeah.
My cables would go and you'd press it right into these crimp things, and then that would connect to the next bit. Well, dude, it's been awesome hanging with you. Thank you so much for joining us in Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm excited to get my studio wired up the right way, get normals in and all kinds of stuff like that. And a reminder, Rockstars, go to traceaudio.com and use the custom patchbay labeler and use the coupon code RSR15 to get 15% off your custom printed and shipped patchbay label.
Yeah.
Very cool, dude.
Sweet.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for
watching,
me.
Rockstars. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: iZotope, Native Instruments, Adam Audio, and SAE Institute Nashville. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes at iZotope.com, nativeinstruments.com. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in the show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. And please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's a great way to help support this show. And leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of this interview or who we should have on as a guest in the future. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.